My name's McKinlay and I'm a driver for Team Brit. The most satisfying thing for me in racing is the actual racing itself, the sense of the competition, the challenge to better yourself. Our aim at every race is to leave there faster than when we arrived. If we achieve that, then we generally leave the racetrack happy. So this is one of the Team Brit cars. Brit standing for British Racing Injured Troops. This is 312 and it's my car, the one I race in. One of the differences of this car is it's actually a two-seater. So we use it for training purposes. So when we go for new tracks, we use it for driver training, but also for new guys who want to come along and try out, motorsport. My passion for racing began sort of in the era that I grew up. So you had Nigel Mansell on the telly, then you had Ayrton Senna in Formula One, which led into Damon Hill and Michael Schumacher. So it was like the real heyday of Formula One. So I guess really it was there that my interest in racing started. I'd always wanted to join the forces, and at the age of 17 I went into the local recruiting office. And I didn't actually go to join the army. I went to join the Royal Marines. But the Navy guy wasn't there, the Navy recruitment guy wasn't there, but the Army recruitment sergeant was there, and he happened to be in the REME. I got chatting to him about it, and then he started talking to me about being a recovery mechanic and telling me about basically, the recovery mechanic is the AA man of the British Army. Gets to drive every single vehicle that the Army's got to offer. And at this point, it's piquing my interest because I'm massively into motors, anything mechanical. And he talked me around, and I ended up joining the REME. We were just deployed to Canada to do an exercise. And we went out to the rail flats to collect the vehicles that we were going to be using on the exercise, and there wasn't enough guys because generally you should two-man each vehicle, so you've got a driver and a commander. There wasn't enough guys for that, so I was the lucky one, and I was allowed to drive the Krav back on my own on a dirt track, and I was maybe driving a bit quicker than I should have been. And in the Krav it has a suspended driver's seat, and I was travelling down the dirt track, and I must have been going about 35–40 miles an hour, and I hit a great big bump, and the seat fully compressed and popped me up out of the driver's hatch. And luckily I sort of landed to the side of the driver's hatch, and my legs kind of stopped me from going forwards. Had I gone at a different angle, I could quite easily have gone over the front of the tank. That was one of those moments when you kind of go, no, nobody's watching, we'll just carry on. One of the great challenges for a recovery mechanic is perfecting the art of driving the Foden wrecker. It's basically a big lorry with a 12-ton winch on the front and a 25-ton winch on the back. The art of driving that properly is something that a recce mech would wear as a badge of honour on his chest. And it was difficult to drive because it had an old-fashioned crash gearbox, no synchro mesh, high-low ratio, so you have to double clutch and rev and match the engines, all things that are really alien to a 19-year-old guy who's only just learned to drive. So during my tour of Bosnia, I had a few run-ins when I was driving the Foden wrecker out there. There's some roads you can barely get 2 cars to pass, let alone two trucks. So we were heading to Split in Croatia, where the boat was, to put the truck on the boat and go home, end of tour. We actually ended up going down a route that we'd not been down before, and we were going up a hill, and there's sort of on the left-hand side there's just a cliff face going upwards, and then on the right-hand side there's another cliff face, but it's a sheer drop. So we were coming up this hill and it's kind of blindsided, and as it crests and turns, it just dropped away. And with the Foden, it's got a high-low ratio gearbox, and you have to flick a switch, and it's pneumatically operated. So, and basically the air pressure is generated by the engine when the engine's being driven. But as I came over the hill, I was in 5th gear, and I went to go down to low ratio 4th, and I pulled a false neutral. So the engine stopped driving and it stopped creating air pressure, and I pressed the brake, and you kind of have one press and that was it, and I just used all of the air pressure and we just started freewheeling down this hill, and there's a blind turn at the bottom. I said, we're going to have to stick it in the wall because I can't see what's round there, and if we go over the edge then we're doomed basically. And so I said, get yourself behind me, and I was all prepared to move out to the right and literally stick the truck into the wall to stop us. And luckily, as I moved out to the right, I just caught a glimpse of the bend at the corner as it opened up, and so I kind of steered the truck round the bend at the bottom, and the road opened up and it sort of dished out, and we would come to a rest at the bottom. And I remember I got out of the truck, I was just like, I've got to take a minute. So being in the army is a very team-orientated lifestyle, so you do a lot of activities together, and one of the activities we did quite regularly was sort of corporate karting. After sort of basically whipping all my friends at corporate karting, I decided that I might like to take it a bit further, and bought myself a Rotax Max 125 go-kart, and decided to enter into some club racing. Talking about my accident is always a bit of a tough one for me because I actually have no memory of it. The last memory I have is from about 14 miles up the road in the Thetford fuel station, filling up my bike. I've always had motorbikes since I was 16, and I gradually worked my way up to my full bike licence, and I had a Kawasaki Z750, which I bought brand new. However, I had a wife as well, who, life's all about compromises when you're in a marriage, and we were always on the agreement that I could keep the bike until we had children. And it just so happened that my wife was 5 months pregnant, and I'd managed to keep the bike for 5 months, but it'd come time to sell the bike. So I put the bike up for sale on eBay, and there was another guy in my unit. It was only me and him who had sort of bikes, and he basically said, "Oh, come on, show us some good roads around here." And so I said, "Right, yeah, well, I'll take you down the 1075, which goes from Thetford to Watton. It's about 12 miles long." And apparently we were travelling down the road, and the guy who I was riding with, unfortunately he overtook me going into a bend, and the bend actually sort of tightened up on itself, and he didn't realise until too late, and I was kind of positioned out to the left of the road to open up the bend, as it were, because I'd been down that road before. He took avoiding action, sort of sat his bike up and crashed in front of me, which caused me to leave the road. Unfortunately, I hit a tree at 60 miles an hour. I fractured my pelvis, broke my back, broke ribs, punctured lungs. The worst injury was the head injury that I received. So this is the helmet I was wearing during the accident. I'm not really sure why I kept it. I just put it away in the in the loft, so to speak. But I mean, it's actually, as part of, since I've been part of Team Brit, we've actually used it, and I've taken it around to schools and shown them the importance of why you should always have a good quality crash helmet. Apparently, when I was in hospital and I came around from my surgery, they had to dose me up with morphine because I kept saying, I've got to go and prep my go-kart because I've got a race at the weekend, and that's all I could. I kept trying to get out of bed, but obviously because I had a fractured pelvis with the external fixator and I wasn't allowed to stand up or anything. So after my accident, my first real clear memory was coming home and the door opening, and at the time I had a Staffordshire Bull Terrier called Daz, and that's my first real proper memory after the accident, is coming home and him flying out the door. I was in a wheelchair for 3 or 4 months, so I had to sleep downstairs separate from my wife. Everything was the same, but everything was different. You know, obviously I had the physical injuries, and everybody was concentrating on the physical injuries and getting me back to walking, and life for me just seemed a little bit harder, a little bit more difficult to take. Really lacking in motivation and really struggling with memories, you know, to the point of real frustration where you just want to bash your head on something because you're like, why can't you remember what you've literally walked, you know, 5 foot from one room to the other? Why can't you, you know, why can't you remember what you've come in here for? It wasn't until I got to Headley Court about a year later that everything started to unravel, really. And within that appointment, he basically said to me, I think we need to rebook you in because I think you sustained a brain injury in the accident. I kind of went into well, a bit of denial, if you like. Someone says brain injury, whether you like to think it or not, everybody conjures up a worst case scenario image in their head. So that worst case scenario jumped into my head and pretty much probably hindered me from there on with my recovery. So I was eventually discharged from the army, medically discharged from the army in December 2006. But I was still carrying on my rehabilitation, and it wasn't until 2011 that I found myself, you know, in a position where I wanted to find a sense of purpose again and get myself back to, you know, some kind of a normal life. You know, getting up at a set time in the morning and going to work and having a purpose. I went through quite a few failed attempts at sort of working with people because of my emotional my emotional instabilities. Sort of, you know, I could go to bed at night happy and with no outside interactions. I wake up the next morning and I don't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to get out of bed. I'd just completely withdraw and not interact with anybody. And that always left me with the feeling that I didn't want to work for somebody else because I was always worried that I was going to let them down. And that's actually worse, probably worse to me letting somebody else down than letting myself down at the time. So I decided to start my own business. So in 2013 I started a alloy wheel repair business. Just literally was the repair of wheels, no paint. It was repairing flat spotted wheels on cracked wheels. Little did I know at the time how actually in demand that service was. So I started offering this service, fix your wheel within half an hour, and I started getting business from everywhere. And I very quickly went from the back of a van to a workshop with like 3 people working for me. So I'd be going to work at 6 o'clock in the morning and staying until midnight, 1 o'clock, and repeating doing that. And family life was sort of taking a massive second place. So I decided to sell up the business. And it just happened at that time. I had an email just drop in from a guy called Dave Player. Never heard of him before. And Dave was inviting me along to a kart force rookie day. And the idea of kart force is to get injured troops into endurance kart racing and help them get focus back in their life. I turned up to the first rookie day in Reading, team sport track in Reading. And you know, even then I remember turning up in the car park, and you know, there's guys there in wheelchairs and, you know, limbs missing and things like that. And I instantly went, no, it's not for me. I remember phoning up my wife and saying, look, I don't think I belong here. These guys this is all for rehabilitation from conflict. I just hit a tree. You know, I was just a guy who had a motorbike accident, and you know, and my wife said, well, you're there now, so you know, why don't you see what it's like? It really sort of the first taste of karting since my accident as well, back into corporate karting. And believe it or not, I won the race. Kart Force helped me put a lot of things into perspective in my life. I know people say, oh, it's only karting. But when you're driving, if you're angry or you're not completely focused on the driving, if there's a guy nudging you from the rear and you're concentrating on him nudging you, you're not concentrating on your driving. So it's about choosing the right things to concentrate your energy on. And Kart Force started that ball rolling for me and helped me. So after the tryouts and for Kart Force, you know, there were a group of guys who were selected to take part with Kart Force during the 2016 season. And kind of our first proper race, if you like, a proper endurance race, was a 12-hour endurance for the Army Benevolent Fund, and that was a team sport in Warrington. We started off initially with 2 teams of 5. Just before we turned up to the event, the team I was on went down to a team of 4, and then at 6 o'clock the morning of the race, we went down to a team of 3. So, not really kind of knowing what we were letting ourselves in for, we were like, yeah, no, we'll go with it. And you know, we did really well. We won the race. We won the race by 12 laps. I remember the joy of finishing the race and winning. I also remember the sheer agony in my arms and my body when we were for the next sort of week after having a battering for 12 hours. So after a season of karting with Kart Force, I was invited to step up and have a tryout with Team Brit. Team Brit is sort of the car racing part of Kart Force. So you start in Kart Force, and if you feel that you want something a bit more than karting, then you can make the step up into Team Brit. I mean, the difference being that Kart Force is a charity. Team Brit race at the moment in the Fun Cup. The Fun Cup is sort of a single make endurance car series. The cars look a bit funky. They look like old style Beetles. They're not Beetles. They're single seater race chassis with proper sequential gearboxes and race suspension, racing brakes. The only part that is actually from a Beetle is the windscreen wipers. First round of the season was at Silverstone. We could have had a better race. I made a mistake in the first stint, sticking it in the gravel on the second lap. So by lap 6, we were 4 laps down on the whole field. So we were 32nd and four laps down. You know, from that point, we kind of took the stance of, well, we can only get better. So we got our heads down, and we actually finished 16th. We were happy with that. We were aiming for the top 10, but you know, it wasn't to be. Moving forward, you know, obviously we're going to do the rest of the Fun Cup season. Our next step on the sort of the motorsport ladder from Fun Cup is GT4. So we're already looking at which car we will be competing in next season in the GT4, where we've got some tests coming up with a driver coach based at the Le Mans circuit. So there's massive plans for Team Brit, and it's kind of, it almost got to the point now where I know what racing I'm going to be doing, but we don't know what else is going to be added in. It was really exciting. It's kind of strap yourself in and just go along with the ride. And I'm fully, you know, I want to stay with Team Brit all the way, and hopefully fulfil the dream at the end, which is to compete in the Le Mans 24 hours. This is the pinnacle of endurance motorsport. You know, if you finish in there, you've actually, that's an achievement that you should be proud of in your life. And for where Team Brit have come from and the direction we're going, when we get there, it's going to be an achievement I will talk about for the rest of my life.